Mabrica, bienvenidas, bienvenidos, bienvenides a esta presentación especial de Reencuentro Taíno Conference. Welcome to this presentation of Reencuentro Taíno Conference. Soy Priscila Colón, cofundadora de Casareito y codirectora de este evento histórico. I am Priscilla Colón, co-founder of Casareito and co-director of this historic event. Antes de comenzar, quisiera notar que esta conversación se llevará a cabo en varios idiomas: español, inglés y dos variantes del taíno. Before we begin, I'd like to note that this conversation will take place in several languages: Spanish, English, and two variants of taíno. Esta será una conversación improvisada, durante la cual abordaremos muchos temas, pero vamos a intentar dejar fluir la conversación, así que puede que cambiemos de un idioma a otro. So this is going to be an unscripted conversation during which we're going to try to cover a lot of different topics, but we're going to try to let the conversation flow from one language to another. Si necesitan apoyo adicional, pueden ver los subtítulos más abajo. So if you need additional support, you can see the subtitles below. Ahora les pediré a mis invitadas que se presenten en sus idiomas, el idioma que deseen. I will now ask my guests to present themselves in their languages, whatever language they choose. Comenzaremos con Ra. Let's start with Ra.
So, Dairile Ra, Dak Anulia Ra, mi nombre es Ra, my name is Ra. Datraha Taino Boricua, Dak Toka Taino Boricua, soy Taino Boricua, I am Taino Boricua. Datraha Waria Boriquen, soy de Boriquen, I am from Boriquen. Thank you, Arikumabu Hahom.
Thank you. Gracias. Yacieli.
Miyari Dairile Yaseli, Datraha Aba Taino Tequina. My name is Yaseli and I am a teacher. Soy maestra. Me llamo Yaseli.
Gracias, Jajón. Thank you. Tao, Dacanulia Priscila Colón, Dacto Catequina Taino. Hello, my name is Priscilla Colón and I'm a Taino teacher. Hola, mi nombre es Priscila Colón, soy maestra del taíno. Ahora vamos a comenzar con la primera pregunta. Let's start with our first question. ¿Por qué quisiste participar en esta mesa redonda y cuáles son tus objetivos para esta sesión? Why did you want to participate in this roundtable and what are your goals for this session? Ra, would you like to begin?
I wanted to be part of this conversation because I think it's a really important conversation. I think that the work that we're doing with language, with the Taino language, whether it's with the Hiwatahia variant or the Taino Nike variant, is super important. And I think it's really important for us to sit and chat with each other, learn from each other, collaborate with each other, and support each other. And so that is my main goal in constantly being in conversation with other people in the community, is to find ways to help each other, support each other, and collaborate, because it is my deep belief that that's how we move forward and succeed in anything that we're doing, is by doing it together, by helping each other out.
Yeah, igualmente, I think it's such an important conversation. I'm very excited to be part of this conversation where folks teach different languages and we're all here with the same purpose of decolonizing. So my goals here is to continue thinking about ways that we can continue to decolonize language education, which is something I've been thinking about for a few years now in the PhD program that I'm in. And to just provocar una conversación sobre temas importantes, movernos más allá de las ideologías restrictivas coloniales, ¿verdad? So to give a more, a wider view of language, a different way to think about language rather than the restrictive ways that the colonizer mindset has had many of us think of language as.
Por mi parte, estoy muy interesada en tener este tipo de conversación con varias personas de la comunidad que, aunque están aprendiendo diferentes variantes o enseñando diferentes variantes, tienen los mismos objetivos. So, for my part, it was really important to have this conversation with folks in the community who may be either learning or teaching a different variant, but we all have the same goals. creo que hay mucho más que nos une que nos divide. I believe that there's so much more that unites us than divides us. And it is through conversations like these that we're going to model that to other people. Y es a través de este tipo de conversación que vamos a poder mostrar un ejemplo de cómo se puede lograr. Vamos a empezar, yo creo que con el tema más fuerte. Let's start with one of the toughest subjects, I think. Algo al que aludiste, Yaceli, something that you alluded to, which is decolonization, descolonización. Sé que es un tema muy fuerte porque es un proceso que nos afecta a cada uno de nosotras aquí, de personas en la audiencia. I know this is a tough subject because it's something that affects those of us here and those in our audience. Yaceli, ¿nos puedes contar un poco de cómo tú ves esto de enseñar o aprender el taíno como parte de la descolonización? Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about how you see this topic of Taino, of learning Taino, as part of the decolonization process?
Yeah, so for me, learning the Taino language as part of decolonizing my lifestyle, my mind, my mindset, and my spirit is super important. For years, I've been studying this idea. I'm a former bilingual teacher, English, Spanish, dual language bilingual teacher, and I've been thinking a lot about the hierarchies of correct English versus correct Spanish, who speaks better, this whole narrative about who speaks better Spanish, who speaks better English, and really we're fighting about who's linguistically colonized best, right? Who speaks the colonizer language best. And for me, I've gotten to a point where I'm like, these aren't even languages we're supposed to be speaking, right? So that's where this fits in for me. Of like, let's go back to the languages that were forcibly stripped from our ancestors for many, many years, that there's still rascals of them, right? But that we can now go back and relearn or unlearn our old ways, colonial ways of thinking, that, those languages are gone, they're extinct. No, they're still here, and we've recovered them in many, many different ways, in Hiwatahia, Tainonaiki, and it's super important that we continue to move in that direction.
Yeah, similarly, as Jaceli said, for me, it's first and foremost a part of my personal decolonial process of my personhood, my life, my mind, my spirituality. And I think that, for a long time, we were connected within our Taino community or communities to our spirituality and all these other aspects of our culture, but the language was missing. And so that now that we have these variants, I think it sort of kind of comes full circle. And all we need to do is put in the work to learn it and to share it with other members of the community, with our friends, our family, to promote it and take pride in it. So for me, the decolonial aspect of it is that it's necessary. It's necessary to our decolonizing, to celebrating, promoting, and taking pride in our culture and our heritage, and also taking pride in the fact that we have always been creative beings. And so the fact that these variants are existent today, and that we're learning them and that we're teaching them, is proof that there is resilience within our creativity, and that's something that we should not take for granted or undermine, that we are creative people and that we will always find ways to thrive and survive and be alive, the most alive that we can be. Yeah.
Oh, I love what both of you said, which is it's not just about recovering the past, but it's really about showing our resilience. That is beautiful. Do you have any examples, like a personal example or maybe in the classroom of in a way in which language has helped you decolonize? Si tienen algún ejemplo en particular de cómo el idioma las ayudó, o a lo mejor dentro del salón de clases las ayudó a descolonizar alguna idea que tenían anteriormente, maybe an idea that you had in the past.
This example might be a bit broad, but for me, it's the fact that each language is a different way of looking at the world and experiencing the world and understanding the world. And through our indigenous language, we can look at our world differently. And that might be a bit of a culture shock for people who are just learning an indigenous language, right? It might be, I've had people say to me in class, students say to me in my classes, but why don't we say this? I don't want to give a concrete example, but they'll say something like, why don't we say this line in Taino the same way we say it in English? And it's like, because we don't have to. Not everything has to be a direct translation of English or of Spanish or any other European language that they might be coming from, right? French, right? Because I have Creole students in my Taino classes who are of Haitian descent and their home language is Creole. And so sometimes I have students ask me those questions like, well, why can't we just directly say it like this? And I'm like, because that's not how our language works, right? And that's okay. It's a different way of looking at the world, and that's what we want. And that is part of the decolonial process, right? Is understanding that the world, that there are other lenses to look at the world and to understand the world around us, our relationships to one another, our relationships to the land, to animals, to our resources, right? Yeah, I hope that that answers your question.
Oh my gosh, yes. And as you were talking, I I thought of a couple of different examples, not just from Taino, but also other indigenous languages. So there was a Menominee speaker that was talking, gave a TED talk, and he was saying that when he was learning his language, he asked the teacher one day, well, how do I say he ate or she ate? How can I tell the difference? And she said, our language didn't have that gender difference. There was equality in our language, just like there was equality in our society. So he realized in that moment that he was applying gender roles from his English, the colonizer language. He was applying that to the language that he was learning, and it just kind of like blew his mind, and he realized, oh wow, gender equality was even in our language, which I think is really nice to also see in Taino. Many of the words that we are learning don't have gender because they're gender neutral, so they can be applied to many, to all of the genders, which is beautiful to see that that was also part of our culture.
Like
um,
cacique.
like
And I
cacique.
think a lot of people, if they're coming from the Spanish, if maybe their Spanish is their home language, they think of the word cacique as a male, as referring to male. But in fact, the word is gender neutral, and it can refer to a woman or a man who's a leader in the community, who's a chief, right? And yeah, that's a perfect example of that in our own culture, right?
That makes me think of, in my personal experience, something that learning Hiwatahia Taino language has impacted me is that it's a good reminder of exactly what you're both talking about, right? That the language is a reflection of worldview, and that we are often we're ethnocentric and we see things from our perspective, obviously, right? So learning a language reminds me, like, come out of your worldview and enter the views of others. And as someone who teaches teachers, I teach teachers of English language learners in New York City, right? So students coming in speaking all these different languages. That's something that I often talk about and try to get them to understand through activities and things like that. So for me as the instructors, it's important to have that reminder and to actually experience that as I'm learning a language.
I also wanted to say, there's a big aha moment that a lot of people are getting is when we explain what the word hibaro may have actually meant. Um, where if you break it down, it could mean a couple things. It could be person of the forest. It could even mean hibaro, as in forest love. It could mean just someone who loves the forest. But we know that that word was used as a pejorative term to demean our people, right? And we started integrating that word into our own vocabulary to demean ourselves. And so ourselves have integrated that self-hatred, right? Because the colonizers use that word against us. So now we start using that word against ourselves. So once you start learning the language, you start really understanding what, this word means, and you can start unlearning all of that, trauma inflicted language, really. Y lo voy a traducir rapidito porque yo creo que esta parte es importante, que es que en muchos casos, cuando la gente ve los videos, por ejemplo, de Casa de Rito y ven la sesión sobre la palabra jíbaro y el significado real que podría significar persona del bosque o podría significar amante del bosque, porque jiba significa bosque, ro significa amar o amor. Ahí nos damos cuenta del significado real de esa palabra que se usó peyorativamente, se aplicó a nuestros ancestros y a nosotros mismos. Nosotros como es tomado esa connotación negativa, la aplicamos a nosotros mismos y es como seguir esa colonización. Es como un proceso de autocolonización. Am, Creo que en esos momentos es cuando nos empezamos a dar cuenta, es hora de empezar a descolonizar nuestros pensamientos al aprender este idioma y el significado real de estas palabras. Una de las preguntas que quisiera abarcar ahora, one of the questions I'd like to cover now, es cuáles son algunas de las críticas que has recibido sobre tu trabajo? What are some of the critiques you received about your work?
For me, as a language teacher, and also as an artist in the community, and also just as like a person, who is promoting the culture and promoting us taking pride in our indigenous heritage. Um, one that we don't have any right to claim this because this is like de los antepasado. Like, yes, we are, this is our lineage, but like um why put any importance on it now? And that's a colonial mindset, right? To not see a different culture as valuable. That's very much rooted in racism, and we know that, and we can point to a lot of research about that and stuff. So, I don't give that time or energy because I know that it's a mindset that is so ignorant that it's like it's based on racism and internal racism, right? Internalized racism. I think that something that I'm sure you have experienced too, Priscilla, is like people criticizing the language efforts, even from inside of the community.
One of the critiques that I get as a dual language bilingual scholar who focuses on debunking colonial theories of language is the colonial theories, right? Colonial perspectives, one of them being this purist perspective of like, what's considered pure Spanish, pure English, or even what's pure Taino, right? And that's a major critique that I think we all need to unpack as, that comes from a very colonial mindset to think that languages are static and they don't change, right? So languages are forever changing and they're very fluid and they evolve and they are always in contact with each other as people have always been in contact with each other, right? So even what we consider English today, as I know, many of us know, if you read Shakespeare, it has changed so much in the past few hundred years, right? Same thing with Spanish, but also more and more virtually globalized we become, the more contact there is and the more we borrow words from each other. And I actually, it's called borrowing, but I like to say, humans have always been influenced or inspired. We don't really borrow, we are just influenced and inspired by each other. And we have words now, like in English, there's ballet, which is French, almohada, right, which is Arabic, el internet, right? So vienen palabras en muchos idiomas, suddenly they're considered English or Spanish or Taino, right? So we need to be very mindful that whatever our ancestors spoke was also evolution and hybridity of their antepasados, of their ancestors meeting, colliding, hybrid, coming together and creating this language that then evolved, or I should say languages and dialects, right? So that's one of the major critiques, and it's a critique that I often debunk in my work with teachers and in bilingual classrooms. And that's a lens I bring into the classroom as a student of the Taino language.
Oh my gosh, I love that. It's one of the critiques I get all the time is how come Taino Naiki, as an example, is using loan words from Spanish or French or whatever. Okay, Quechua uses loan words from Spanish. Menominee uses loan words from other languages. There are indigenous Canadian languages that use loan words from French. The indigenous languages in Brazil use loan words from Portuguese. We're in constant contact with each other. We're constantly changing and evolving, and why not borrow words? I think one of the examples that I use is the word gabayu was borrowed into some of the indigenous languages of our own in our own sister family in the Arawak language family. Gabayu comes from caballo. Like there was no word for it, so they just borrowed it. Or the one that I love in Puerto Rican Spanish, we tended to use mapo. We got that from mop because it was easier to say than trapeador. And then eventually the Real Academia Española had to add it to the dictionary, and now it's an approved word. That's what happens. People start using the word and it gets approved. I touching back on what you said was the purity of language. I find that such a hilarious thing to think about. Like what language has all of the words that will ever exist? It's not going to happen. And Ra, I would love to know what are some of the critiques, or maybe you've gotten the same critiques as we were just discussing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that this idea of purity is also just it's based on colonialism and racism. And I think that we really do ourselves in our communities, and the evolution of our communities a disservice when we close ourselves off to innovation, and the fact that that is the key to growing, and that that is how our ancestors um, moved forward and evolved in their foodways, their wisdom, their culture, right? Is through allowing that flow of creativity and being able to be wise enough to absorb from other people, from other people's wisdom and knowledge and culture, and vice versa, right? It's a give and take, it's a constant give and take. And especially now in this globalized world, it's impossible not to be influenced by each other. And so, of course, that's going to be reflective in the ways that we speak. And even when we don't talk about our indigenous language, if we just look at Caribbean Spanish, as Jaceli was saying, that's a mix of different words, right? Like and we're proud of that, right? Like we're proud of our Boricua Spanish or our Dominican Spanish. So why can't we also be proud of our, indigenous Taino language and the ways that it has been able to absorb and absorb influence from other cultures because of the day and age that we live in, right? For me, something that I have encountered as a critique is just that is this idea of like what makes this variant real, or what makes it like valid. And I think that regardless of the pushback what's going to define its thriving or its success and its survival is people using it. And I think no matter how much people fight back against Hiwa Tahia or Taino Nike, as we see people are using it, people in the community are using it to create art, to create music, to communicate, to express themselves. And that is how you breathe life into a language. So regardless of the critiques that whether Taino gets or our mixed Spanish gets, Caribbean Spanish, now, especially, I think that reggaeton is like a really good example because you see so many people across the world trying to sound like reggaetoneros. And reggaetoneros use a mix of indigenous word and African words and Spanish and English and everything that makes up who we are in the Caribbean. And that's seen as cool now. Now it's like really dope, right? It's like really cool to sound like Bad Bunny, right? And that's because he took pride in it. And people before him, like Teo Calderon, right? They took pride in it. Evie Queen, she took pride in it. She took pride in everything that she is. So I think that we just have to continue just being proud of who we are and everything that makes up who we are. There's always going to be pushback, especially when you're doing the right thing. I think there's always going to be pushback. So, yeah.
That's beautiful. Oh my gosh. So a couple of thoughts. Absolutely right. Human beings are creative people. We're constantly creating new things with language, whether it's art, music, rap, whatever that may be. And one of the examples, and I think just because of the place where the Caribbean is situated, it's the perfect spot to receive influence from so many places. North America, Central America, South America. There's tons of archaeological evidence that people from all those places came to meet in the Caribbean. So, how can we possibly imagine that there wasn't language exchange? But we know that there are actual examples. For example, Dr. Renier Rodriguez Ramos, who was part of the conference, he talks about the fact that they found the guinea pig early on in Boriquen, and that it's most likely that the Taino word "cori" that survived actually comes from "cuy," the Quechua word for guinea pig, because that's where the guinea pig comes from. And he even talks about the fact that they're finding that there was a trade route for the prize guinea pig from Peru to Colombia, and then from Colombia it would navigate directly to the Boriquen. And they haven't found the guinea pig in the Lesser Antilles at all. So there was like a direct trade route. And like, so of course, it makes sense that the guinea pig plus the word for the guinea pig would come to our island, and we would incorporate that into our language. So, and then there are other folk like Wati Bilibais that talk about the influence of Mayan on the language of Boriquen. So I truly believe that we had influence from everywhere. And if there's archaeological evidence, there must have been also a linguistic um, mix, right? Just like we have with reggaeton nowadays, right? Oh, I absolutely love that. I think one critique that I get, and I think this is something that you were alluding to earlier, Ra, is why do I share this language, the videos, the work with the world? Why? It's something that belongs to us and we should not share it with anyone else. I think that's a major critique that I get. Um, that one, it goes against all of my beliefs. like I, I see my personal mission in this world. Um, I'm using language as a vehicle to achieve that, and language is a vehicle to achieve the greater mission of reconnecting, of a spiritual awakening. That's really what it is. Language is just a vehicle to achieve that. And so if that's the goal, then why would I keep the language to myself? If the goal is an awakening for everyone, then it has to be shared. And it has to be something that I invite others to take part in. So that's this is like on a personal thing. And then on like a practical level, is if we continue trying to control the language, then it'll die again. So if we continue to try to close it off and say, this is mine only and only I can do it, or only a special set of people can use it, then we're just guaranteeing that it's not going to continue. Um, I give the example in Hawaii, it had basically gotten to the point of language extinction. And then in the 1970s, they started a lot of this revitalization movement. And now you can walk through a grocery store and hear people speaking Hawaiian. So how could that be possible if you don't open it up to everyone to be able to learn it and speak it? So that's my one of the major critiques that I get, and my response to it is that something that you've encountered also? And, you know, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I definitely heard that, and I think that, and I totally agree with you. And I also look a lot to the indigenous nation of Hawaii. I look to the Cherokee Nation, to the Maori, to the Potawatomi, the Menominee, and seeing how they have had this courage and this confidence to share their culture and their language with the world. I mean, if you go to the Cherokee Nation's website, they have so many language resources. So if right now any of us want to learn Cherokee, we can learn some Cherokee words, phrases about their culture, their history, their holidays, important people and their history. And I think that that's super important because that's not about people taking your culture. It's about people seeing who you are and bearing witness to who you are. And I am never not confident in sharing who we are because I enjoy watching and listening and bearing witness to other people's culture. And I don't have to take it as my own, right? I don't have to participate in any uh, cultural appropriation. I can simply just acknowledge um, someone's culture and appreciate it and feel good that they take pride. I mean, I love listening to classical Indian music. I'm not Indian and I will never tell you that, but I love classical Indian music. I love watching classical Indian dance. I love, Indian food. Like, and I appreciate the wisdom that they have brought, that culture brings to the world. And that is the same for a lot of other cultures that I appreciate and look to, but I don't need to take it as my own because I'm proud in my own. I think that sometimes that mentality of not wanting to share, or kind of like sort of como se dice, what's the word that people use,
Gatekeeper.
gatekeep, to gatekeep our culture. Sometimes it's rooted in this insecurity, but we have to overcome that, and we have to say, like, to ourselves, to each other, like, it's okay that we've been through what we've been through, but we're here now, and we can take pride and we can share with other people and have other people enjoy what we bring to the table, and not have this fear that they're going to take it from us. Because even if someone were to try, it's we have our mark, and we've left our mark. And people know who we are, then they'll know who the real Taino people are. And so we don't have to fear that anyone's going to take it from us. And if someone allows themselves to be influenced by us, that's a good thing. Because I think that we have something really special to bring to the world, and especially in a world that is dealing with the climate crisis and racism and all these colonial, systems, oppressive systems. There's something very special. There's a solution that exists within different indigenous nations that, if we were to allow ourselves to open up our ears and our hearts to those solutions and to those keys, that there is something there that's going to help us all heal and be better people out in the world. And so, who's like, how can we not want to share the wisdom if we know it's going to be for the betterment of us and of others? And I think that, just to wrap up my what I'm saying, um, I think sometimes that inability to see that bigger picture is about not loving your community enough. If you don't love your community enough and you don't see how not wanting for us to grow is actually a detriment and actually really harmful, then you don't love us the way that you might think that you love us as a community. I think that when you love someone, you want them to grow. You want them to succeed, whether they're beside you or not. Like you want to root for them, and I think that that's the way that we show love for one another, is by wanting to support each other, wanting us to grow and expand and share. And I don't know any other expression of love that is bigger than that, right? To like want to root for your people, right? So yeah.
Oh my gosh. I think you've hit on the root of a lot of the intention, right? That I also have behind the work that I do. It comes down to that one word, love. Um, love for my community, love for the fact that so many of us are still disconnected, living in trauma, trying to heal. Love because I'm there and I know you're probably there too, and I want to help you just as much as I want to help me. Um, and I truly believe that I wholeheartedly agree with what you said. When you love your community, when you love someone, you really want to see them thrive and grow. Um, and the way that we do that is by making sure that not just my voice, but our voices are heard and that we seek allyship by raising awareness amongst even those that we think may not even be like us. But I think the more open we are, the more receptive we are to other cultures, to other languages, we realize that actually we're more alike than we are different. And if you truly believe in the spirit of oneness, then you realize actually we're just one. We're just the reincarnation of Great Spirit, and we're just showing it in different ways. And I know that we're having like a practical conversation, but I think all of this is actually rooted in spirituality as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I also agree. Everything's spiritual, right? We're guided by our ancestors, or I always say, our ancestors speak through us. And right now, the fact that this conversation is happening is because it was meant to happen. Astrologically, this was lined up right. I think we resist through our ancestors continue to resist and show their resilience through us, and through the language. Right, I always say that our languages are a reflection of our ancestors' resilience and resistance. But I also wanted to touch back on something that you both mentioned, that this topic of making things open and accessible to all, and visible. And I think the visibility is the key thing. For me, I think about the hidden curriculum a lot. And that's all these things that are so normalized in society that we don't think they are related to any specific culture, but they are, right? I think about all the ways of beings, the indigenous ways of beings of our ancestors that have been erased and dismissed, and that I personally, and I know a lot of people weren't exposed to them because where were they, right? So part of making it visible is for reclaiming and opening the doors for our younger generations to see other possibilities than the ones that are so hegemonic and dominant everywhere they go, right? Think of, the hidden curriculum. I often start by, when I talk about the hidden curriculum in my classes, I always start by thinking about what kind of dolls did you see at the toy store, right? That's the hidden curriculum. What hair texture, what skin complexion, was there a doll with vitiligo? Was there a doll in a wheelchair? All these things, right? What's normalized as the standard neutral way of being? To that, spirituality, religion, right? So many things that I'm still unpacking, like, oh yeah, that's that comes from Christianity. I didn't know that. At this age, in my mid-30s, I'm still like, oh, yeah, that is Christian. I thought I was just like this neutral, normal way of being, right? Unfortunately, there's still so many things to unpack. So if we don't make other ways of being, other ways of knowing visible, other ways of speaking visible, then how are kids that are growing up in such an oppressive colonial society going to know other possibilities, right? How are we going to help them decolonize from an earlier age so they're not in their mid-30s still discovering things? So I think that's for me, that's an essential part of making it all visible. And I hear someone in the bus talking a language and I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound like this or this or that. And then, I learn like, oh, it's Taino. What? I thought they were extinct, right? Immediately that opens up a whole doorway for people. So that's also a huge part of it that I think is super important.
What an amazing thing to touch on, visibility. So I have maybe a challenging question. How how do we make it more visible then? How do we make ourselves, our language more visible? Are there concrete things that either you have done or that you recommend that other people do to make ourselves, our culture, and our language more visible?
Well, I think that we're living in this time and age of social media, and we have these amazing tools that connect us to people around the world in a matter of seconds, right? Through Instagram and YouTube and TikTok. And if we use those tools correctly, then we can use them for connection, education, positivity. And I think that the work that you're doing, the content that you put out through Casareto on your Instagram, your YouTube page is a perfect example of that, right? You're reaching the masses with a video that's reaching all these people from different places, who knows, right? From all these different places that maybe are Taino, maybe they're not Taino, and they're learning something that they wouldn't learn anywhere else, maybe. So I think that if we continue to do that, create content and also take opportunities to talk to people when we're face to face with people and when they ask us a question, sometimes, and I know that this is something that I go through a lot, sometimes living in a colonial reality, sometimes it's exhausting to have to educate people. And I often, and Jacely and I talk about this a lot, like we have to pick and choose, like, is this the moment? Is this the moment that I correct you? Is this the moment that I like, it's going to take 10 minutes to explain to you that the thing that you just said is so incorrect. And sometimes, most times I say, yes, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go in, I'm about to start that conversation with this person. And whether or not I walk away feeling like good from it, I know that I planted a seed in their brain. I know that I just told them something or I just taught them something that they wouldn't otherwise have heard from somewhere else. I also take that opportunity in the classroom. So for me, as an educator, I teach a lot of different things, right? And so one of the things that I teach is dance. And when I am in that setting, I'm teaching dance, but I take that as an opportunity to talk about where the dance come from, who are the people who created that dance, what culture, what country. And so when I'm talking about salsa or merengue or bachata, I find a way to talk about Taino people. I find a way to talk about us because that is part of our legacy. And I talk about the instruments that are used in these Caribbean music that are Taino instruments like the maracas, right? And a lot of times, not to my surprise, students don't know that. And they're like, oh, this instrument is indigenous. Oh, I thought it was just Dominican, or I thought it was just Puerto Rican. And then I have to unpack that and be like, well, what is a Dominican and what is a Puerto Rican? And how is that? How are those colonial labels, right? So it's layers, and luckily when I'm teaching, these are students that I'm going to see week by week, so I have time to break it down and kind of plan my curriculum so that we're touching on these things. But if I only have a moment with a person, I try to fill in as much information so that they're walking away with something concrete that they maybe didn't know about. And I think that's so taking as many opportunities as possible to create visibility, whether that's through social media or videos or music or conversations with our friends, family, strangers. I think that's how we spread the word. And it has to be like a team effort. Like we all have to be on board doing this um, in order for it to spread, to knowledge about us and who we are to spread. And I think that we're doing that. I think that I see that. I see that there are more people um, taking on this challenge in different ways to educate the masses about who Taino people are, where we come from, what are our ancestral homelands, what's our language, what's our spirituality, what's our music, what are our foods. So I'm happy that I'm alive to see that, and that's of course thanks to the people who started before us, who unapologetically were like, I'm Taino and I'm gonna be proud of that and I'm gonna spread this, and I'm happy that I can say that I know Ika Mateo and that she's one of my mentors because she's one of those people who has been unapologetically Taino for a very long time and has inspired so many of us and has sort of given us a path, where there maybe wasn't even one for her, but she created one and now we're continuing that work and that legacy.
I I love that, and I agree with you that the advent of social media puts us right now in a very privileged position that a generation ago didn't have, right? So, I've been talking a lot with people in the community, and they've been giving me, oh yes, the information about how they started in the 70s with no resources, meeting in someone's basement, trying to, uh, like photocopy and type stuff up with an old typewriter. And then a lot of the resources are lost because that's paper copies. So now we're building on that and then are able to take it so much further because of technology. Um, I have to applaud some of the work that I've seen you do. So you mentioned dance. There was also a video that I saw you post that I was like, "Ah, that's so good." You were shooting basketballs. You're just shooting basketballs, and you were counting the numbers in the Hiwatahia Taino variant, and I was like, "That is amazing!" Like you have your for kinesthetic learners, you're giving them the using basketball as a way, you're giving them the language. So thinking outside of the box as well is what does like teaching Taino look like? It might just be you go out and shoot some baskets and count the numbers. It might be you're teaching someone how to dance and you're explaining the instruments behind that particular rhythm. It could be all sorts of things. I also saw you shared that beautiful picture, sorry, the beautiful video of your final project of some of your students and how some of them they were incorporating the language into teaching a workout video. Like that's cool. Like you're incorporating it into something you do every day, or creating a poem or a prayer, a song, a video. So that's really giving us visibility in a variety of different ways using new technological mediums and new ways of being because I'm sure our ancestors didn't go around doing workout videos, but now we do. And now we can do it in a modern day variant of Taino. So I absolutely love that.
I
Uh,
would also add that, thinking about, well, going online to what both of you are saying is that we have to find ways, unpack things that we're already doing and think about how the language can help decolonize those things, right? Or even embedding the language in those things for visibility and even for our own personal practice and development of the language, right? So, and also things that you're interested in. So Ra makes music videos, which I'll plug in here, right? So even that, like, and that reaches out, for her, that's just her thing she loves to do, but also that reaches out to a certain audience, right? So thinking about the world we live in now and like the pop audience, people that like pop music will turn to that and say, oh, what is this language? Oh, cool, there's this music in this, right? And just for me as the bilingual educator, thinking about the spaces in which now I introduce myself in the language, right? And people are like, what is that? And just even if it takes 10 seconds, it makes a big difference for visibility, right? So I think of ways to like find the cracks, right, in our colonial dominant white institutions, right? I work at universities, and it's like, where can you find those cracks for that visibility to take up that space that we very well need to take up, right? Very much need to take up. One concrete example, I'll give two concrete examples. One is, I teach teachers to welcome all of the languages in their classroom and to always inquire and make build community with families whose languages have been stigmatized for many years, like families that speak indigenous languages, like Mixteco and Nahuatl, Garifuna, and all these languages that are often erased in bilingual classrooms because English and Spanish are the dominant languages, right? So now I always say, teach this term in Taino because you may not have students that speak that language at home, but you can spark that in these 8, 9-year-olds thinking about like, oh yeah, I'm Boricua or I'm Dominican, so to really think about, oh, this is a language that's alive and people are speaking it somewhere, right? So even planting those seeds. Another concrete example is I'm currently writing my dissertation, and I thought about ways, to include the language. And one is like the school that I did the study in, its pseudonym is Tequireji, which means student in Hiwatahia, right? So even those little things of like, what am I going to name the school? Oh, I'm going to pick something in Hiwatahia. And now it's Tequireji Elementary School. That's the name of the school, right? And even purposefully calling the students Quisqueyano, Quisqueyane versus Dominicans, right? In a dissertation document, which has been traditionally very, traditionally academically white or very restrictive definitions of what academic language even means. So for me, those have been some examples.
Yes, and there's so much more, right? So we're coming at it from what we're passionate about. I'm sure there's going to be someone out there who's passionate about, comic books or, you know, w- immersive technology, all kinds of other stuff, things that we haven't even dreamed about yet. We'll be able to then use that passion and include the language and the culture in that. And that's really what inspires me to keep doing this work is that, I'm doing things like working on my passion projects, but that will in turn inspire someone else, which will in turn inspire someone else. And we have no idea what 5 generations from now will look like. We could have people speaking Taino in the grocery store. We could have signs in Taino in different areas, things that are already being done in different parts of Indigenous America could be happening as well in Taino. So that's really it makes me excited to think about what we could do because of these efforts. And I'm just so happy that you both are also a part of that because we're all doing it together in our own way, and together we're all working toward that same goal.
And
Um,
I think that
yeah,
that part is super important because we validate each other, and validate each other's visions and goals. Because I think that this work can be very lonely if you don't have um, people around you who you can turn to and be inspired by, but also turn to and talk about the challenges of this kind of work. And I think it's really special um, to have people around you who have a similar mindset and goals, because otherwise you just kind of feel like you're on your own, yeah.
you're right. Thank you for touching on that. It is a very lonely job if you think about it. So you're working on your own, you're creating a video, then you put it out there. And then you're like, "Is anyone watching? Did anyone learn anything from it?" It's very much like you have to go on faith that what you're doing is important, and maybe you'll hear from someone a few months later say, "Oh, yeah, this one touched me." And it's those little moments that keep you going because you realize, "Whoa, whoa, this is important." And if, one person reached out, but maybe there's so many others who maybe it sunk in, maybe it didn't, but maybe few years from now, it'll finally sink in. right? And that thing will keep playing in their heads. And I do want to acknowledge, take a moment to acknowledge the fact that I'm so grateful for um, all the people who do write, who'd say, um, this touched my life. You know, there are people who've written, a woman wrote and she said, my mother just passed. And watching the videos and hearing this language is helping me keep her alive. And I feel like I'm doing what she would have loved to have done if she hadn't passed. I feel reconnected to my grandfather. I feel like I'm finally finding my true identity. I mean, that's huge. And one of the first messages that I received that like just had me bawling, just bawling. Um, I think I had been publishing videos for maybe 3 months. There was maybe like 17 subscribers to the YouTube channel, and I was just like, just keep going. Like you just need to keep going. This is important work. And this 15-year-old boy wrote, and he said, I'm 15 years old and I'm learning Taino and I'm going to teach my kids, and I hope that they will teach their kids. And the minute that happened, I realized this is beyond what you can possibly imagine. With one little video, simple phrases, like you have now touched 3 generations worth of lives. And that's what inspires me every day to do this is those lives that I will never meet that will somehow be touched by the work that I'm doing. And that's why I always say, like, think 5 generations, 10 generations ahead. You have no idea what's going to happen. Just do the work, keep doing it, because that's what that's the objective. It's not the me, the here, the now. Yes, that's important to be able to get work done, but it's beyond that. Um, and I love having met people like you who are doing that same work because, you're doing it here, someone else is doing it here, I'm over here, and then we're coming together in this beautiful way that, we don't have that 30,000-foot view. We can't see it. We only see what each of us is doing. Um, but I think something beautiful is coming out of it. And that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps my hope alive. Um, and I want to say something also about this, um, because some people may see it as a competition, and I want to address that. I have no room in my life for competition, and this is why. I read or I was listening to a very important speaker. His name is Simon Sinek, and he talked about the forever game. And it's this concept that if you do what you love, you're going to want it to go on forever. And what you love may be the same thing that someone else loves. And so both of you are doing the same thing, right? Working toward the same objective. But you want it to keep going. And so even when you're gone, is that thing that you love still going? So I'm working on Taino right now. You both are working on Taino. Other people may be working on Taino. Other people may be working on other indigenous variants. Once we're gone, is Taino going to keep going? Right? So it's not a competition. It's nothing to do with I'm competing with you, Ra, or I'm competing with you, Yaseli. It's can we keep the objectives, the mission, the passion going? And who is going to come through and become the other what is that, bearer of the message, right? So we leave this world, who else is going to come in and take on, carry the torch forward? So the more people we have working, um the better off we will be, and it will be that forever game. It will go on forever if there are more of us working together. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think that this idea of competition, comes from a very low vibrational place, and it comes from a very emotionally mature place. when it comes to this, like you said, there is no room for competition. There's only room for us to collaborate and help each other grow and root for each other and root for the language and root for all the variants, because everything's going to speak differently to different people in the community. And that's okay because we're, even within our own community, we're diverse beings. Um, and everyone's going to find a corner that they feel comfortable in, and that's the whole point. And so you want that. We want people to feel comfortable and go in whatever direction they're called to, without, we can't lose focus on the fact that it's about the bigger picture, like you were talking about it, about keeping it going. And I think that, like, I want to see Taino Nike succeed as much as I want to see Hiwatahia succeed and any other brand that someone might be working on. And then I want to learn them because I'm like, I'm into this. Like, I'm a nerd for this. I'm a geek for this. So like, why wouldn't I want to be part of that in a positive way, right? So I totally agree with you 100%.
So I would love to turn, speaking of the different variants, I would love to turn and do a little comparison of some of the Taino variants, some of the words, phrases that we use. Because as you said, I think that's once we start comparing, we'll be able to learn from each other, right? And then we might also be able to see that we do have a lot of words that are similar. So no matter which variant we start off with, we'll have a pretty good foundation and then be able to learn the other variants, right? So I'd love to just look at a couple of words or maybe some phrases, some short sentences so that we can share with the audience what those are in the two variants that we are talking about today. So let's see. We're going to say these in Spanish and English, and then we can each take turns saying it in our variant. So how would you say yo soy Boricua or Quisqueyano, Quisqueyana? I am Boricua or Quisqueyano, Quisqueyana. How would you say that in Hiwatahia?
That's it. Do you want me to answer? Or do you want to answer that?
Well, we should both because it's different. So
Oh yeah, okay. So if I wanted to say I am Boricua or soy Boricua, I would say da traja Boricua.
and da traja quisqueyana.
Perfect. And then in Taino Naiki, it would be Daktoka Boricua or Daktoka Quisqueyano. And I love the fact that we have words that are similar. Da and dak. I, me, it's the same. The difference was in the verb, traja and toca, and then Boricua and Quisqueyano, Quisqueyana, the same. So I learned one new word. And now I can say that in two variants. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, I wanted to say before you move on to the next example that I've been taking the Taino Nike online classes, and I learned that bahia means two or and also, and in Hiwatahia we have badia. And so I didn't even need to look at the significado when I was taking the course because I was like, oh, that sounds like badia. And then I hear your voice in my headphones saying, this is what it means. And I was like, I would have figured that out because of these similarities, linguistic similarities. I would have, if had I seen a full sentence, I would have put two and two together and be like, oh, this probably means this. Yeah.
I've been catching the same thing with Hiwatahia. Like, I know you use alu for in or at. And I was like, oh, we use alu for during, in, or at. So it has a slightly different meaning, but it's around the same context. So I'm able to pick up on these little things. So see, there's so much more that unites us. Okay, next word. How would you say maestro or maestra, teacher, in Hiwatahia?
In Hiwatahia, we would say tequina.
And it's the exact same word in Taino Naiki because we know that it comes from the leader of the areito or the dance, the teacher, the one who would do the choreography. So we use that exact same word. Okay, very cool. How would you say hablar, to speak, in Hiwatahia?
We say ahia.
And that's the exact same word in Taino Naiki, ahia. It's the exact same word. So look at that. We basically can say at least one sentence, a couple of sentences there just from knowing that a lot of these words are similar. So let's try to put it together. How would you say yo hablo Hiwatahia, I speak Hiwatahia?
You would say da ahia hiwatahia or da ahia hiwatahia taino.
And for Taino Naiki, I would say Dakahia Taino Naiki, or I could even say Dakahia Hiwatahia. It's very similar. So look at that. We've already covered quite a few words, even sentences that are incredibly similar. Okay, now let's go to a little bit harder one. How would you say buenos dias, good morning, or good day in Hiwatahia?
We would say usamauka.
Awesome. And in Taino Naiki, it would be Taigwe. Obviously, one of us is absolutely wrong, and we need to fight about this.
We can also say usakasakabo to just mean like good day.
Oh yeah.
And usamauka is more specific to morning time.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. Can we address the elephant in the room? Is one of us wrong and one of us right? Or
We are both right.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
We are both correct.
Yes, you could have two opposing ideas that could still be true. Absolutely. So thank you. And then how would you say buenas noches, good night, or good evening?
You would say usakasakuda.
That's beautiful. And I would say taikaraya. But if I'm speaking to you, I can say usakasakuda. And if I'm speaking to someone else, I can say takaraya or buenas noches or bon nuit or whatever other language I want to say it in. I think people get so caught up in what they're saying rather than like, why are they saying it? So if I want to wish you a good night or a good evening, isn't the sentiment the most important thing rather than the exact word that I use? I think we need to kind of pull back sometimes and like, what's the intention?
Yeah.
Is the
Yeah, in the
intention-
community, I've heard people say usakasakuda for good day, or it could also mean like good morning, right? But I've also heard people say usawehi, like good sun, or usaweyu, also for good sun. And to me, like it's all correct, and I understand it. And it's all just different variations of the same sentiment, and that's awesome that we have that and that we have like options to choose from, right? Like this morning I texted my friend and I said usamauka usaweju, like I just said good morning twice, but like why not, so yeah.
And this is a great reminder that, we're working, when we're revitalizing a language, we're not working in a traditional way where language comes from the people, right? It's not like como la Real Academia Española inventa una palabra y de repente se adapta y todo el mundo la está usando. No, it's the other way around, right? El vocabulario viene de la gente and then it gets embedded into Webster's Dictionary or la Real Academia. And this is a good reminder that whatever's going to stick from what we are teaching is whatever people choose, right? Whatever people choose and use the most and whatever they're texting, eso es lo que se va a pegar. So it's coming from us, right? And it always has. The language comes from the people. So no matter how much we try to impose, no, it's this way or this way, it's going to be what it is. Or, the next generation is going to decide, and whatever we use and whatever sticks is going to stick.
Imagine trying to tell a Quisqueyana or Quisqueyano not to say tato. Like you can't, like they're always gonna say tato mani. Like it's just, and
eso es incorrecto. No.
Yeah, like you
no.
Yeah, no se zafacón. Like don't use that at all. Like that's not gonna work either.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. The language comes from the people. I think because ego in general wants everything to be correct. There's a right way and there's a wrong way. We forget that there is a way, and the people will decide eventually what that way is. And that same sentiment, there's a person, I'm sure you've listened to him too, Lance Twitchell, who teaches one of the Alaska Native languages. He himself, during his presentation, says, we're coming up with rules, grammar rules, and patterns and stuff. This could all change in 5 years once people use the language, make it their own. And that's the goal. We want people to use the language and make it their own. Like, that's not our job, is not to be the language police. Our job is to inspire, plant the seed, like you said, plant that seed, and then have people take off with it and see what happens. And maybe you thought that you were planting a seed and it was going to be an apple tree, but you get pear. So what? Enjoy the pear. you know? I think we need to let go.
I'm
Yeah.
glad that you mentioned Lance, because I think it's important for us in this work to not just connect with each other, but look to other indigenous language programs and teachers, instructors, and the struggles that they're coming up against, the challenges, because oftentimes it's the same, and it's all rooted in colonial ideologies. And sometimes when we see that, like these ideas of language purity, which are bogus, right? When we see that other indigenous communities are coming up against that in their language revitalization work, we can go, oh, see, we can direct it to colonization. It's not just us dealing with these hurdles. Look at all these other people who are also dealing with this. So we can point it. We can see the culprit, right? We can say, okay, this is why we can't get caught up in that mentality, right? So yeah.
Yeah, and it reminds me also that because most of us don't even know our histories, we don't even have the evidence to point to the fact that this is colonialism.
Mhm.
So if we take it back to 1492, right after the Spanish crown united the kingdom, Castellano was imposed on the entire kingdom of Spain and then all of the American colonies. So this whole thing traces back to colonialism, because even in the Iberian Peninsula, there was a division. There were many languages being spoken, and Queen Isabel decided that her language was going to be the correct and pure one. And so that was imposed on a whole lot of people, and then it was imposed on us. So if we continue that idea, all we're doing is just recreating that colonial mentality that only one language can be right, and that we all must
Mhm.
speak the same language.
I
Mhm.
recently was because I also have uh, heritage from Andalusia, right, from the south of Spain, like many Caribbean people do, right? We have that European mixture there in our families. I was curious, like, what was the indigenous language of Andalusia prior to the crown's invasion, right, and forcing Castellano? And I learned that this language called Tudetani was there before. And so then I went on a whole rabbit hole, like trying to like, what is Tudetani? And like, because I think that to understand, what was happening in Europe at the time as Columbus is setting sail, that has a lot to do with us and what ideologies were taking place, what oppressive, violent ideologies were taking place there, which has everything to do with what he was bringing with him in terms of ideologies. And yeah, so that's a little fun fact.
Yeah, these are great reminders that, language has always been used as a weapon to control people, subjugate people, and that there have always been variants of a language, right? And it's kind of ridiculous to think that we need to standardize a language that in and of itself, as you both have reminded us, is a very colonial and dominant term, right? Ideology, a dominant way of seeing, like, I'm going to control these people by saying this is only the correct variant or the pure variant, right? And I think of Toni Morrison. I think of her quote when she says, she has said, like, the very function of racism is distraction, that it keeps us from doing our work, right? And that's exactly what the oppressors want, for us to keep fighting each other and over these things. And it's like, when are we finally going to unite and actually do the decolonial work so that the next generations, 7 generations from now, they're not at the same spot, right? In the same position of trying to reconnect and this and that, fighting each other over which variant and things like that. It's like, this is the distraction that the colonizers want, that have always wanted and continue to want. So we need to keep that in mind.
Oh my gosh, the fighting is the distraction. Because if
Mhm.
you keep fighting each other, you don't do what you're supposed to be doing, which is gathering together, raising awareness, uniting as one voice. Really, that's the key. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Wow. I need to take that quote. I'm going to put it right here. Pause it on the screen. Have people write it down because that is amazing. So I would love to, as we start wrapping up, I would just love to hear from you. Um, what is your hope, your wish for the future of the Taíno language, the community? ¿Cuáles son algunos de sus deseos para el idioma taíno, para la comunidad?
For me, I want to be able to listen to music in Taino Nike and Hiwatahia Taino. I want to see content in the variants. I want to see funny content, serious content. I want to see like shows in it. I want to see art in it. I want it to be brought into classrooms, into public school classrooms. I was a few years ago. I was hired by a school in Washington Heights in New York, and the teacher was teaching the students who were predominantly Caribbean kids about Taino history. And I usually, when I do presentations like that, I bring my instruments and I have a little PowerPoint and things like that. And I walked in and there were Taino words all over the classroom because that was, what they were learning at that time. And when I pulled up my PowerPoint, I thought I was going to be teaching them new words. And they were like, oh, we know hamaca, barbacoa, tobacco, like areito. And I was like, okay, so what do I teach them? I was like, oh, okay, yeah, you don't know this word. And they're like, yeah, we know that word. And I'm like, oh, I was just like trying to figure out like, okay, so what do I do? I wasn't expecting that. But that was so awesome because this teacher really took the time to like do some research, and she herself was Quisqueyana, so it was a personal thing for her, and it was so awesome to see these young kids learning about something that's of their heritage, right? That maybe they're not going to be taught at home, they're not going to be taught out in the world, but in the classroom, this teacher made a point about taking time to teach them this, and that's going to stay with them for the rest of their life, right? And so I would love to see that, and like just like to the max, right? To walk into classrooms where young people are being immersed in the language and are able to say full sentences and express themselves and sing and dance in the language. And for us to just be able to have conversations I really believe that there's, in the near future, we're going to have a hybrid of Taino Nike and Hiwatahia, and we're going to be able to talk and text each other and sing and dance in that. And so I'm excited because I think that that's what we're going to see. So yeah.
I'll build off of that because I want to see all of that. And I'll add one thing that I won't be able to see in this realm, but I keep, I've mentioned today, and we keep referring to these next generations, but I can't wait to witness from a different realm that generation that's fluidly communicating in the language and to see what ended up sticking. And it's probably not going to be a variation of both, what, like none of the words that we're even saying, right? They're going to total like tato, where really what they enforce is está todo bien, like no tato. Right? So what are those generations, how is that going to sound, what that's going to look like? That's what I'm excited about.
They're gonna invent their own. And it'll be better than what we could think of because they're gonna be using AI and they're gonna be using technology that we've never even heard of or thought
Taino
about.
slang.
Oh
It's
yeah.
gonna be Taino slang. Reggaeton Taino slang.
Yes. Can you imagine
Dembow Taino slang.
can you imagine what like the shortcuts are? Like
Yeah.
oh my gosh. I have so many dreams, hopes, and wishes for the community and for the language. I I know that I can't even imagine what that world will look like, but I know it's going to be pretty fabulous. Um, and I think for me, it always starts with bringing it back to a spiritual awakening, creating a sense of identity, having people reconnect spiritually with ancestors in order for them to then be so sure of themselves, right? Like I was saying earlier, when you're so sure of who you are, then you're not afraid of sharing that with the world. And I think we're going to be able to achieve that in a few generations. Having people understand where we come from, who our ancestors were, to know who we are, and then to be able to create who we will become, and to create that world according to that new identity, really, to really understand who you are. I I want to see, and we're already starting to make this a reality. I want to see movies in Taino, courses in Taino. I want to see like letreros, like the like street signs in Taino. I want Taino to be as normal as taking a breath. You don't even have to think about it. Um, that it's just like, oh yeah, of course, that's Taino. And it's right there. It's on a t-shirt, it's on a billboard, it's on in a movie, it's in TV program, it's in schools, that it's so common that everyone just knows. And I think that's when you realize, okay, that like the work is we're getting close to the work being done. Um and since I've taken this on as like a personal mission, something that I'm constantly working for, that's why I'm always looking for like how do we make us visible? How do we make this happen? Well, we make it happen with Reencuentro Taino Conference, bringing people who are working together. Maybe they're working in isolation, but have the same objectives. How do we bring them all together so that we start generating ideas? There could be new projects in the work. And Ra, you were talking about, maybe there's songs that are going to be mixes of Taino Naiki and Huatahia. We can make that happen. There's nothing stopping us from making that happen. Now I have a new idea. So when we bring people together who have these same objectives, we can do that. We can do it through Reencuentro Taino Conference. We can do it with courses. We can do it with, any idea that people have. We can start creating that world now, being the next step, setting it up so that the next generation can take it and run with it, and they can take it wherever they want to go. So those are some of my thoughts. I'd love to hear, as we close off, what are some of the projects that you're currently working on?
So currently I teach online classes, online language, Hiwatahia Taino language classes. Right now, beginner 1 and beginner 2. And I also lead a Taino poetry circle that has been meeting once a week for 10 weeks. And we have a poetry chapbook that we are gonna release soon, hopefully in a few weeks. And it will have a mix of Hiwatahia, Spanish, English, And, I will be offering this poetry workshop again. And so I hope to have people who come in with Tainonaiki so that, the end product of the workshop is to have the poems that participants came up with during the workshop collected in a chapbook that then we can release into the community, and hopefully we can have all the variants reflected in there. So that's in the works, and hopefully working on new music in Tainonaiki and Hiwatahia. That's that. So yeah, those are some of the things that I have going on.
And I'm very excited to be a part of all of that because I've just been very consumed by writing my dissertation, but I am part of the poetry circle, for example. And I continue to study the language in Ross classes and outside of Ross classes. So I'm very excited to be a part of that.
That's amazing work. It is truly amazing work. As you mentioned earlier, I'm working on a Taino course that is using digital technology to teach folks everything from like basic words and phrases, full conversations, culture, history, a little bit about everything. And I'm hoping that I can we'll be launching the final one in September of 2025. It's a big undertaking. It's a lot to do, but I think it's very much worth it because as I look at the around, I realize we need materials. We need a lot of materials before we can really expand. And the way to do it is to start using that digital technology that is available. So that's one of the projects that I'm working on. I started getting requests from the community where they were watching the videos that I post, but they said, "Do you have anything for little kids?" So a lot of the videos that I post are more for like ages 9 and up. I just got this idea to start creating like songbooks for the little ones. And so I'm working on a set of songbooks now.
I just want to say thank you, Rukumabu Hahon Pushela, for inviting us to be part of this conversation, for all the work that you're doing. And the conference, that was amazing. That was an amazing experience. Your content on social media and YouTube, it's so important. And I'm really excited for all the other creative things that you are going to continue to bring forth to the community. And I'm just really grateful that we could connect, and that I could bear witness to all the amazing things that you're doing, and allow that to inspire me as well, and make me feel validated in my values and my work, and simply just seeing you and the stuff that you're doing. And thank you to Yaseli for the amazing work that she's doing with her dissertation, and also investing in her decolonizing experience through learning the language and using the language in the academic sphere to decolonize, in the spaces that she's in.
Thank you, Ryan. I have to say, the work that you do inspires me because I see the time that you take with your students, you guide them, you allow them to co-create. And I think that's such an important part of revitalizing a language is you really do act as that guide on the side instead of the sage on the stage. You really are allowing them to flourish as students, and inviting them to be part of this revitalization process. And that's truly inspiring. That's the kind of work that I'm like, "Oh, I can't do it, but I'm so glad she's doing it." So truly, it is beautiful to see. And I am so happy that I got to know you and Yaseli through this process because I'm learning so much. Yaseli, the work that you're doing with decolonizing and translanguaging and allowing us to be our full selves with all of the languages that we have is so important. And even just speaking to you and learning more about about what you do, um, makes me realize, wait a second, there's a lot here that I need to be learning about too that I can incorporate into my lessons, and that is
Mhm.
truly important.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you, Priscilla. And I feel that way about you. I'm very inspired by the work that you do and the content that you put out, open access. I think, as an educator who works with K to 12 from grades kindergarten to 12th grade, students and teachers and prospective teachers at universities, I think it's so important. There's so little content available that covers, or no other content, but very little content that's accessible and free and open. And, that if we were saying, just open to all for anyone to access. The average person, that has a computer and internet can have access to this. And that's what it should be about, right? And so just modeling that to me is very inspiring. And the whole conference and your videos, Priscilla, and of course, Ra, all the work that you do. I feel very lucky to have both of you in my life, and especially as someone that has spent the last 7 years as a PhD student in academia, which is very violent, and there's very little folks doing the type of work that you're doing. To me, it's like a medicine. So thank you both, and thank you for creating this space for us to connect, and all the spaces you've created, Priscilla, for us to connect. And I look forward to many, many more opportunities to do so.
Oh, thank you so much, Arikomabu Hahom. What you just said, this is medicine. This is how we heal the world. Coming together, bringing our ideas, being inspired by each other. And this is what I hope that we can continue building together as a community. So thank you to all, to our audience. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, info@tainoconference.org, and we will see you next time. Taika Raya, Usaka Sakuda. Are there any other words that we should say? Good night, good evening.
That's
Buenas
good.
noches.